Hi everyone, thanks for giving up your summer Saturday afternoon to come to the Midlands Mega Meet, Mug Mega Meet. I'm Chris Dewhurst from Drag and Drop, and over the next probably 20 minutes or so, maybe longer, I'll walk you through writing a simple application on RISC OS. There's about 20 or so slides, but don't let that alarm you, because I'll go through them at a fairly steady pace. But the idea is that once I've finished whittering on, you can go into one of the other rooms, room 3, I think, cellar 3, and watch the rolling presentation, or you can, I think this is being recorded, so you can watch it on catch up, or you can download these slides from the website. I'll give you the web address in later. Now, writing applications on RISC OS can be a complicated business, and various books and tutorials in the past approach it from different angles. Some go into a lot of detail to start with. Others kind of present a really sort of simplified start and then gradually build up an application, a bit like we're doing here. So there's, as I say, more than one way to skin a cat. But throughout the course of these slides, we're going to put together fairly simple application, mug themed, and what it will do is plot a circle, a sun shape in the window, and allow you to click on a couple of icons to make the sun get bigger and smaller. Thought it should be a fun session. All programming should be fun, really, even when it's for serious business. Now, we'll be writing the application in BBC Basic. Now, some people think because it's so old, it's only for beginners. But you can write some really quite sophisticated programs and applications using BBC Basic 5, which has come with every RISC OS machine, well, every distribution of RISC OS since RISC OS started. But even if you don't know much about BASIC, you shouldn't have any problem following the discussion. What I'll do is after every few slides, I'll drop out into my desktop. Well, in theory, this should work, but I'll drop out into the desktop and show you and run what we've written so far, so you can see what's how we're progressing. Or incidentally, if you're seeing some strange colours on the screen here, some things look a bit posterized. I think that usually sorts itself out in a while, but hopefully shouldn't affect us too much, because the slides here have got text and a few graphics, so hopefully that won't be much of a problem. But as I say, you can watch the slides again on catch up, sorry, in the breakout room, where they'll be rolling on a rolling basis after I've finished, and you can download the slide pack from the website. And just before I go on, most of the code today is taken from the application tutorial and listings book, which if you haven't bought yet, I can thoroughly recommend. Well, of course I would, because I wrote it. But if you haven't got it, then do please buy it. I mean, it seems to be very popular. In fact, I was glad how popular it is. It's sold nigh on about 100 copies. But if you haven't got it, then it's on special offer from the website, or visit eBay to have a look as well. And if you don't want to buy the paper book, then planning to release the CD-ROM later in July, which has not only the application tutorial and listings book, but also all the other books that have come out from Drag and Drop over the past few years. So If you don't want to buy a paper book, then you'll be able to have a browse on the CD when it comes out.
Chris, we've got some noises off.
Is there I'm trying to compete with somebody here.
Time to reveal what's on the menu. So, Chloe, what are you at?
Right, they're gone. Great. Where was I? Oh yeah, CD of books which you can. They've got PDF editions on, so you can print at home. HTML editions, so you can browse on the web. Anyway, back to the subject in hand. As I say, I'll drop out of the slides every so often to show you on the desktop. But this first thing is to load up Edit or whatever your favourite text editor is, where you can type in BBC Basic programs. I'll do a demonstration in a minute on the desktop. There's the web address for downloading stuff for today, the slide packs and the code and what I call the standard procedures, which I'll show you on the next slide. If you know BBC Basic, then you'll recognise all of these. Now, don't worry too much about what these procedures do. Just that you need that code in your program before you start. So let's move on to the next bit. And as I say, when I finished, you can go at your own pace if you're interested in this sort of thing. Look at the rolling presentation or the slides. Now, when we write applications, the first thing is to track the errors that might occur because you've made a typing mistake or something that's gone a bit squiffy. So the first line of your program should always be what's written there. Basically what that piece of code does is to stop the application and report the error. And the reason why the error line is divided by 10 is because if you're using edit, you can use edit's function to go to a particular line. Obviously, if you're using another type of text editor, it may have its own menu option or function to take you to the line. And by the by, you'll see these bits of code which read a bit like sys, and then in inverted commas wimp underscore close down. All the calls to RISC when we're programming applications look a bit like that. It's sys wimp something or other, and you'll see a few more of those as we go along. Those people who know BASIC shouldn't have a problem with the next few lines. We're reserving some memory here for, first of all, for RISC to communicate back and forth details of things we need to know when our application's running, like what mouse button's being clicked, maybe what menu option has been selected, and all sorts of other things we might need to know. Well, lots of stuff which we won't cover. We can't hope to cover all of here. And the other bit of memory we need to reserve is what I call T here. That's just for window titles, and as we'll see when we come to the icons in a minute, it stores all the text that you put in windows and icons. Radius, well, you might have guessed that's to do with the radius of the circle or the sun that you saw on the screen earlier. We'll come to that later. Then we have to tell RISC to kind of register our app, which is to put it on its rotor of applications which it runs in the desktop, of which there may be a few depending on what you're running. edit being one of them. So the code to do that is, again, you may have guessed, another sys wimp something, which here is called wimp initialize, and some magic numbers. Don't worry too much about those magic numbers. That you can find out more about what they mean if you look in the application tutorial book, or if you're feeling very brave, you can look in the programmer's reference manual. But all you need to know for now is that you've got the sys wimp initialized, then two magic numbers, and the bit on the end, which is graphics. Well, that's just the name of our application, which if you know about, going to the task window by clicking on the switcher icon on the right hand side of the icon bar, and you look at all the tasks, the applications that are running, then that's the name that will appear in there. Next thing we need to do, not all applications have windows, but most of them do. So what we need to do next is to set up a window, tell RISC about what size of window we want, what we want to call the window, what text we want to appear on the icon bar, and a few other things, like the width and the height, for example. So you'll notice that some of the lines there are grayed out. They're the ones which we don't need to worry about for our purposes on today's tutorial. Again, if you want to get further into programming, then they're all detailed in the applications book or programmer's reference manual, or a number of resources on the internet. But there's 5 lines out of those that really we need to know about, and they're all the way we're doing it here is that they're just given as a series of data lines. Some tutorials and books and things like to go into copious amount of detail about poking these numbers into memory, but one of the procedures we saw earlier, that takes care of it for us. But all you need to know here is you put the details about, well, first of all, the title of the window. So here it's just graphics. Then 4 numbers which give the coordinates of the bottom left corner of the window, plus its length and width. And those are given in what we call graphics units. And if you want an idea of, well, how big is 1000 units? Well, if you're running a Raspberry Pi, and by the way, because we're programming in BASIC, the applications we write should run pretty much on any version of RISC-OS from RISC-OS 3 onwards. I mean, I've done programming here on the Raspberry Pi, but nowadays, as I say, ever since RISC-OS 3, really, the applications should run happily, whatever machine, whatever RISC-OS distribution you're using. But sorry, where was I? How big is 1000 units? Well, if you're looking at a Raspberry Pi desktop, then it's the Raspberry Pi desktop is just under 4000 units across and just over 2000 units high. So a width of, well, 1000 units is about a quarter of the screen, something like that. So that's the bottom left corner of the window plus the width and the height. The next line, as I say, it's grayed out, so we don't need to worry about that as long as you write it into your program. The line after that is what we call window flags. Don't let the word flags scare you. All you need to know is that it's a kind of what we call an 8-digit hexadecimal number. That's what the ampersand means. And for our purposes, the 3 at the end of that number means we want a title bar for our window, and we also want to draw graphics on a window. I'll come to that drawing graphics in a sec. But the next line we need to worry about, as I say, you need to include all these data lines, but the next line we really need to concern ourselves with is the title flags. The 9 at the end just means we want our text on the window title. That's in the yellow bar at the top. Well, usually yellow. Sometimes it's white. Sometimes it's another color. The 9 just means we want centralized text. And then to tell RISC-OS that to kind of get our window going, initialize it, whatever you want to call it, we make a call to fn make window or fn look window. And there what we do is we give our window what we call a handle. So W1 is just a shorthand reference, or a shorthand way of referring to our window. And whenever we talk to RISC-OS about the window, we just give it our window reference, which here is W1, but it could be anything W2 or RISC-OS or MUC window or something like that, any basic BBC basic variable really. So we've set the window up, but we still need to open it on the desktop. And here we just make a call to proc open, and we give over the window handle, which is W1 here. Then the next line, I said earlier, I come to the graphics bit. And as you'll see when we go along, the way we're doing this application is that we have to have some way of letting RISC-OS know that we want to draw graphics on their window before RISC-OS then takes over and gets on with putting its icons on the screen and so on. And the next 3 lines really just are there to get synchronize RISC-OS and so don't worry about those. Just a call to proc redraw. Proc plot, we'll come to in a minute, is the actual bit that does the hard work of drawing our sun and making the window orange and so forth. Come to that in a minute. The bit at the bottom there, which I've called the main loop, you'll see this if you look at any application code, particularly, well, whether it's BBC Basic or whether the application is written in another language, because applications can be written in any language really, or any language that's got a RISC-OS kind of version of. It could be C, it could even be assembly language, but we're sticking to BASIC here for so it's we don't get too bogged down in detail. But basically, what that loop does, that repeat loop, is it asks RISC-OS what do we need to know about what's gone on that our application might need to know about. So it could be things like the users clicked the mouse or dragged or something like that. And that another syswimp call here is telling us to get what we call the event number in the variable E. So event number 1 is kind of an oddity because it's RISC-OS's way of telling us we need to draw our graphics, which we may need to do again. We can't just plot the circle or whatever we're doing. We can't just do that once and forget about it. We have to do it because maybe the window's been moved, or perhaps you dragged another window over the top of it. So really it's just to restore whatever we've drawn in there. So for now, all we need to know is that event number 1 means we need to redraw the graphics. And as we'll see in a minute, that just results in another call to proc plot. And then the only other event really we need to know about for now is that line which reads if E equals 3 end. Event number 3 is when the user clicks on the close icon at the top of the window. And I should point out here that writing end like that isn't strictly the way you should do it in writing applications, because when you get onto writing sort of fully blown, almost professional like applications, you need to check for things like, well, has the user saved their work, and check all sorts of other things. But for our purposes, just ending the program with end, so ending the application with end, does just fine. And there's also the option of getting out of the application by pressing the escape key, which is what until in key -113 does. Again, that's not usually the way to do it, but for our purposes, when we're getting started on writing stuff, it will work just fine. Okay, so just not too long now before I'll drop out into the desktop and show you what we've written so far. Just on this slide is the complete program so far. The only things that aren't the only lines of code that aren't shown on that window are the standard procedures. But as long as you've got those in your code from earlier, or you might have downloaded them from the website, then that will be fine. Now, in theory, if I drop out of my slides for a minute, I should get back to my desktop, and hopefully the version 1 of our graphics program looks like this. Well, it doesn't look like much, does it? It's a bit of a shady, a ghostly white window, but it does show that we've set up the window, and it's appeared on the desktop. And if we click the close icon, it shuts itself down. So the basic gubbins of the program are working. So I'll now go back into the slides and resume where I left off. Oh no, that's going ahead of myself a bit. So, well, that's what we just saw just now on the desktop. Blank window, not very exciting, but we'll now start adding some colour and some exciting shapes and some summer themed graphics. All we're doing here is filling in the proc plot procedure, which earlier on was just 2 lines, def proc plot, then end proc. We're just filling in with some code to, the exciting bits to draw graphics, which can be anything you want really. Here, what I've done is to plot a rectangle, which is the same size as the window, then plot a couple of circles using the radius variable, which we came across earlier, which we set at the start of the code. The only thing to be aware of is that XO and YO are 2 variables which the procedure called proc redraw has given to us, and they just tell us what the bottom left-hand corner coordinates of the window are, which may change and will change as we go along. So having XO and YO, or X origin, Y origin, which is what XO and YO really stand for, tell us where we need to start our plotting from. And the GCOL graphics color RGB form of the GCOL statement is quite handy, because you can just specify the amounts of red, green, and blue you want. So there, for example, we've got the dark orange shade is full red, about half green, and low blue, so it gives us sort of a nice orange color. All right. So next thing we come on to is icons, and they're quite quite a complicated subject in themselves, but again, we're going to do a really simple, some really simple code here just to get a flavour of how icons work. And as I said earlier, you can read Programmer's Reference Manual if you've got loads of time, that is. There's a chapter in the application tutorial book on icons, which has got loads of examples to get you used to what various things icons do. But here, all we need to know really is that when we say icon, it's just a rectangular area of the screen or something in our window which can have text on it. It can have pictures or sprites, as we call them in RISC. It can have both pictures and text. But this is the icons are what happen when we've done our graphics work, and RISC takes care of. You might think, well, do we need to draw these blue rectangles and print some text on top? No, we don't. All we need to do is, like we set up a window, we need to set up the icons and tell RISC about them, and then after that, for the time your application is running, RISC takes care of replotting the icons. But down to business here with the procedure, which is called proc icon, and here we just tell RISC, well, which window do we want it in? Again, giving over the window handle, some coordinates, which, rather like the window definition we came across earlier, we just tell RISC where the left-hand corner of the bottom left corner of the icon is, the length and the height of the icon. Then there's another rather complicated number there, which, well, technically we call them icon flags, but for our purposes, you can just think of them as 8 digits, and each digit controls some aspect of the icon, which I'll come to on the next slide. Then after that, we give the text we want to appear on the icon, and that one on the end, the one after on the first line, the one that appears after the smaller text, we'll come to in a minute. All you need to know is that parameter of the procedure should always be 1 for the time being. And important point here, the icons are numbered in the order of creation, and when we come to refer to or tell RISC something, or communicate with RISC about, well, what icon was clicked on, what do we want to do something with the icon, change its appearance, and so on, we have to give over the icon handle, a bit like the window handle. But how do we know, well, what icon handle is? Well, it's always the order in which you create them with the proc icon statement. So icon number 0 is the icon that will have smaller written on it. Icon number 1 is the icon which will have bigger written on it. We'll see more about that in a minute. Well, those icon flags, or as I say, just think of them as 8 digits, starting from the right hand side. So the number 1 right on the extreme right there means the icon has text in it. If you wanted a picture, if you wanted a sprite in the icon, then you would give a different number, but we're not doing pictures here. That's a subject for another day. So for now, that just is 1. Number 2 tells RISC that we want the icon to have a filled background, because you don't have to have a color background. You can just have it plain with the background color showing through. The second one always has to be there. 4 is what we call the button type. It basically means what do we do, what needs to be done when the user's clicked on the icon. And the last two numbers on the left hand side is basically the foreground and background color of the icon. I rattled through that at quite a pace because, well, apart from anything, it's we've got limited time now, but also because it's another of those fairly complicated subjects. It fills pages and pages by itself talking about icon flags and what each of those numbers do, or more technically speaking, what each of the bits of that 32-bit number does. But for here, it's just a really simple example and all you need to know for writing this application we are today. Now, next is mouse clicks. Well, probably the main thing about applications and using them and doing stuff and manipulating things on RISC is, well, what do we do when the mouse is clicked? How do we know a mouse is clicked? How do we know what button is clicked? Well, earlier on we learned about events that, for example, event number 1 was RISC's way of telling us that we need to redraw the window and replot our graphics. Event 3 was to end the program. Another event is when the users click the mouse, and that's event number 6. So in that main loop there, we've got an extra line saying if E equals 6, proc click, and proc click is shown on the right hand side there. It's not really a standard procedure because depending on what the application does, it can the code that's needed is varied. So here we get the icon handle, or we need to know about the icon handle. In other words, which icon was clicked on, and that bit of code there, which is basically telling RISC, well, can we have the number that's located at the 16th byte in the memory area B? Well, strictly speaking, it's the word at 16 bytes on from B, but you don't need to worry too much about that as long as you have that bit of code which says IH equals B pling 16, the exclamation mark, as we call it in RISC, pling. That just gets the icon handled. So once we know that, we can start getting an idea of what we need to do. And just a few moments ago, we said icon number 0, or icon handle, or IH. Icon handle 0 is the icon or the button which has smaller written on it. And icon handle 1, icon number 1, is the button which has bigger written on it. So we know that if the user's clicked on the smaller, sorry, the icon which has smaller written on it, then we need to make the circle smaller. And surprise, surprise, if the user clicked on the icon which says bigger, we need to make the circle bigger. So those two lines, which the first of which is if IH equals 0 and radius is bigger than 0, subtract 2 from the radius. We've made a check there just to ensure that the radius of the circle isn't below 0 or none at all, because otherwise we'll just be plotting a circle with a radius of 0, which would look a bit silly. Likewise, we're making a check to see that the circle can't get bigger than a radius of 300 graphics units. And there we just tell RISC in the last couple of lines of code there just to redraw the window. So now is the another time when I will dive out of the slides just for a few seconds, just to show you what the program looks like. There, oh, the colors have improved. So what do we call it? Graphics 3. So here we've got the window, no longer looking a ghostly white, but looking quite colourful with the orange background and the two icons there. So if I just show you the clicking on the bigger icon, and you should see the circle grow and grow and grow into a bigger and bigger sun, and we can also reduce the size of the sun like that. And you'll notice when I click the icon, it turns white and doesn't seem to turn back to blue until I move the mouse pointer away from it. Now that's all about controlling what the icon does when you click it and what you do when you move the mouse pointer away. Well, it would be kind of nice if we could make the icon flash briefly and then go back to its blue color. Well, how do we do that? Well, I'll tell you. I'll just close that application. I'm just pressing escape to get rid of it and going back to the slideshow. So yeah, the application kind of works okay, but we could make some improvements. First of all is that we couldn't actually drag the window around the desktop. Can we drag it? Well, yes, we can. Very, very simple addition to the code. In that main loop, we saw what we call WIMP events earlier on. Well, they're called WIMP events or just events. If you were wondering, that WIMP stands for Windows Icons, Menus and Pointers, which is a kind of an old-fashioned way of referring to applications, but it's WIMP events you'll see in lots of RISC books and things, but we'll just call them events for our purposes. So event number 2 is just another example of an event that we might need to be aware of. And event number 2 is just RISC way of telling us that we need to reopen our window. Bit strange that we need to do that, but that's what event 2 means. We can either use that sys WIMP open menu, WIMP open window line, or we can just make a call to proc open with that that procedure we saw earlier. So I'll show you the final version of the app in a minute. But as for how can we make the icons better, how can we make them perhaps flash in a different color? This is getting a bit more advanced with icons when we use what we call validation strings. And they're called validation strings really because in the very early days of RISC, or in fact before RISC, icons were fairly simple. They just had, you could choose what background color they had, what foreground, whether they had a filled background and so on. But then as RISC advanced and got better, there was a need to kind of let the programmer control more aspects of the icon. So, and they couldn't be accommodated in that 8-digit number we saw earlier. They couldn't be held in the icon flags because there was no room. So the way around that was to have these things called validation strings, and basically set up an area of memory. Here I've called it V, and in that area of memory you put some magic numbers, a magic string, which I've done there with the basic function to poke some characters into memory. So $V equals, and then R6, 14 is just a magic code for saying, can we flash the icon briefly, and can we flash the icon briefly in color code 14, which is a predefined color, and you can go and look up predefined colors and WIMP palettes and so on. But here it just means can we flash it up orange briefly? So the two lines there which we saw earlier, which we met earlier about for creating the icons, just a simple change. Instead of 1 as the last parameter on the end there, we change it to V, and all that tells RISC is to use the magic code that we've put into memory at location V to make the icon do something fancy like flashing. You can do other things like have posh borders and all sorts, but here we're just going to get it to change the icon color. And oh yes, something I forgot to mention, if you were paying close attention to that, to the icon flags in the there, you might notice that the last number is now 9. Well, all I've done there is to add 8 to get RISC to centralize the text on the icon button nicely. Before, you might have noticed it was left justified. It was over to the left. Not a big deal, but just makes the appearance look nicer. So that kind of that gets us to a point where we've got a nice final working version of our simple application, and I'll give you a wee demonstration. Notice we can drag it around the desktop now, and the icon here let's click on the bigger one. You'll notice that every time you click it, it flashes orange briefly, so it looks a bit nicer when we do that. So let's go back to the slideshow now, and coming on to the last couple of slides. And once I've finished wittering on, you can, as I say, time for some questions, and then you can, if you care to, watch the rolling presentation in room 3, or watch it and catch up, or whatever you like to do. So let me go back into the slides. And just last but not least is to say that, as probably some of you know, Drag and Drop is a magazine that comes out quarterly. And the reason for mentioning it here principally is because there's loads, if you want to know about writing applications and you want examples and get to know more, there's always applications in Drag and Drop that are type in, so in listing form. So if you're interested, then do have a look at the website there. And the next Drag and Drop is due out in the end of July. Yeah, get along and have a look at the magazine. It's on a pay-as-you-go basis, no subscription fees, so you can just, if you fancy one edition, just buy it. And it comes in PDF format, delivered in PDF format, so you can read it on the screen, or it's an A5 size publication, so you can print it out if you so wish. Now that comes to the end of my presentation there. Sorry, I'm just catching up on the chat. Yeah. Yes, I mean there's different approaches to this, like as I said, more than one way to skin a cat. I kind of personally, I kind of err on the side of shortcode, because, well, it's quicker to type in. You're not overwhelmed with reams and reams of code, but particularly when you're starting out writing stuff like this, it's just really an introduction, and then you can go away and look at the other texts. Just in answer to that question, I'd like to prompt MacIcon to be an FN and return the icon number. If you look at that carefully, it does actually return an icon number, but for most purposes, you don't actually ever need to know the icon, as long as you remember what order you created the icons in. but again, that's just the way I do it. There's different approaches.
An informative talk. So thank you for giving up your time today and running us through that. And as many people have said, the Chris's tutorial book is rather excellent read through, and well worth the money, in my view.
Just say thank you to Chris for a very clear and an interesting tutorial. I always think it's brilliant when we get information about writing desktop applications like this in these kind of events, because it really shows people how easy it is to use BASIC, which is built into the computer, just to make their own applications and they can look like professional desktop applications.
I have to agree. It does make it look not exactly easy, but certainly clear and simple. There's not masses to learn to start doing it. So what I'd quite like to see is someone do it with Python. Perhaps I should do it myself.
Isn't that the whole basis of the fireside chats as well? A bit of introduction to things.
I think that's the general idea.
Yeah. So Chris's bit here on basics are perhaps a welcome addition to supplement elements of that as well.